presidential drawdown authorization in support of Ukraine security assistance. DASD Cooper has agreed to be available afterwards to answer any questions regarding the PDA, and then we'll pivot to a few other non-Ukraine related updates afterwards. Thank you very much, ma'am. Over to you.
Good afternoon. Today, I'm proud to announce a new security assistance package to provide Ukraine with more weapons, ammunition, and equipment that its forces are using so effectively on the battlefield. This authorization of a presidential drawdown of security assistance valued at up to $625 million will contribute to meeting Ukraine's critical defense needs. It is the Biden administration's 22nd drawdown of equipment from DOD inventories for Ukraine since August of 2021. It is also the first presidential drawdown for Ukraine in the new fiscal year. I want to thank Congress for its support for the continuing resolution, which enables the administration to continue providing timely assistance to Ukraine. The capabilities in this package are tailored to meet Ukraine's immediate needs, the highlights of which include 4 high-mobility artillery rocket systems, or as you know them, HIMARS, and associated ammunition. Secondly, 16 M777 155 millimeter howitzers, along with 75,000 155 millimeter artillery rounds, and 500 precision-guided 155 millimeter artillery rounds. Third, 1,000 155 millimeter rounds of remote anti-armor mine, or RAM, systems. 16 M119 105 millimeter howitzers, 30,000 120 millimeter mortar rounds, and then the last item I want to touch on is 200 Max Pro mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, which provide Ukraine with a resilient capability for transporting troops in heavily mined terrain. This package will provide the Ukrainian Armed Forces with additional capabilities and munitions that it needs to maintain momentum in the east and in the south, including additional artillery and precision fires. Ukraine has demonstrated the ability to use these capabilities to degrade Russian logistics and command and control, creating opportunities for Ukraine to maneuver and to advance. This has created, as Secretary Austin said recently, a change in battlefield dynamics. Even as the Russian government moves legislation today to claim parts of Ukrainian territory illegitimately, the reality on the ground is that the Ukrainian armed forces continue to reclaim territory and to consolidate their gains. The liberation of Lyman was a significant operational accomplishment, and Ukrainian forces continue to make deliberate progress in the Kharkiv region and also further south around Kherson. The Ukrainian counteroffensive in Kherson has made significant advances over the last 24 hours, and Ukrainian forces continue to liberate villages as they press forward. The United States will continue to provide Ukraine with the weapons and equipment to meet its urgent needs on the battlefield, while also building Ukraine's enduring strength to defend its sovereignty over the long term. In total, the United States has now committed more than $17.5 billion in security assistance to Ukraine since the beginning of the Biden administration, including more than $16.8 billion since the beginning of Russia's invasion on February 24th. The United States will continue to consult closely with Ukraine to meet its evolving battlefield requirements, in coordination with our allies and partners, to provide Ukraine with the capabilities it needs. As President Biden has said, the United States will continue to stand with the Ukrainian people and provide them with the security assistance they need to defend themselves for as long as it takes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. As mentioned, Deputy Assistant Secretary Cooper has graciously agreed to answer a few questions about the PDA and Ukraine security assistance. I'd ask that you limit your questions to that topic while she's here, and afterwards, again, I'll stay around to talk about any other questions that you might have. Let's go ahead and start with AP.
Hi. Thank you, Ms. Cooper, for doing this. Two questions. One is, can you address, if possible, specific ways that this most recent package was tailored to Ukraine's apparent battlefield successes, if there are specific elements that were added or taken away because of how Ukraine is doing? And it would also be great if you could address the question of ammunition broadly, of how much Ukraine is short ammunition compared to Russia, and how, there's been a lot of discussion of how they've made selective use of ammunition to make up for the number disparity. But if it's possible to get specific ratios or numbers of how much Ukraine has versus Russia has based on the assessment of the Pentagon.
Great. So first, I would say in terms of how this package responds to what the Ukrainians need, the capabilities that I discussed, these are capabilities that the Ukrainians have received previously and have requested additional capabilities. And it also responds to, in terms of the volume of ammunition that they need on the battlefield today. We're looking very closely at their consumption rates for ammunition to make sure that they have what they need for the counteroffensive. And then the types of capabilities. I think at this point the HIMARS are pretty famous because you've seen how the Ukrainians can use these capabilities to take out critical Russian logistics nodes, command and control nodes, ammunition depots, et cetera, and really weaken the Russian forces' ability to respond. So having these additional 4 HIMARS is going to enable the Ukrainians and the other capabilities as well to have flexibility in how they employ these capabilities with their forces as they look for additional opportunities to seize the strategic advantage. And in terms of the comparison with Russia, I can't get into specific numbers for you. I would just say that what Ukraine has on its side right now is not just its own capabilities, but the capabilities of all of its allies and partners. And what you're seeing is the United States is providing additional ammunition, but we're also investing in ammunition production, and we're seeing our allies and partners investing in ammunition production. We had Undersecretary LaPlante last week meeting with allies, armaments directors, talking about ways to sustain the industrial base to continue to support Ukraine. Whereas you see Russia, what is Russia doing? Russia is turning to North Korea for assistance. It's turning to Iran. It doesn't have that depth of support.
Thank you. Let's go to Sylvie and then Tom.
Thank you very much. Ukrainian armed forces are consuming every month much more ammunition than the U.S. industry is capable of making every month. So how confident are you that you can help Ukraine as long as it takes, as you said?
So that's where we get into the question of production, and we are confident that we are investing in production. It's ramping up, and we see our allies also ramping up in production. So while today you see very high rates of consumption of ammunition, but you also see an incredibly high op tempo on the battlefield as the Ukrainians press forward very successfully. We are increasing production, and we see over time that we will be able to have a sustainable rate, both for ourselves and for the Ukrainians.
Thanks. Let's go to Tom, and then we'll go over here.
Just a quick follow-up on that, and then a second question, Secretary. One is that it seems like there's a balance between how much we're producing to supply, we and the U.S. allies are producing to supply the Ukrainians, as well as their consumption. And we've spoken before about the clock in the sense of seasonal, there's going to be fall and winter coming. Without asking you to project, what the Ukrainians may or may not do tactically, but is there, part of the calculation is that there has to be a slowdown at some point because of Mother Nature that would help production ramp-ups meet the demand of the Ukrainians? And my second question off that, not on that, is announcement earlier about this drawdown authority mentioned Claymore mines were supposed to go as well, and you didn't mention it. Were they removed from the package?
Sorry about that. Yes, Claymore mines were in the package. Yes, yes, and we've provided. They are in the package, and we have provided those before.
Yes,
that's correct.
Sure,
that's correct. Okay. Yes, and in terms of your question about seasonal aspects to the fight, absolutely. Weather plays a big factor in any war. And here, what we would anticipate is, as the weather changes, maneuver will be much more challenging. I mean, you get really muddy ground. It of course, increases just the challenge to the average fighter, the average soldier, in terms of the impact of the weather on the conditions. Now, for us, we know that we have been looking to the Ukrainians for what their needs are for the winter. You've seen allies taking a leadership role in providing winter equipment to the Ukrainian soldiers, making sure that they have what they need to sustain themselves throughout this winter. Before we were talking about ammunition, but cold weather gear is going to be really, really important. But I'm confident that us with our allies are actually meeting those needs. Not as sure about the Russian forces.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go to Jennifer Griffin, and then we'll go to the phones.
Yes. Hi. There have been reports that the Russians have a train that might be carrying tactical nukes toward the Ukrainian border. Are you seeing any evidence of that? Is that true?
I've seen these reports. I have nothing to corroborate.
And is there anything that you will be providing to help Ukraine protect themselves against a possible nuclear strike?
Well, here, in terms of protective equipment, we've already provided a considerable amount of protective equipment against chemical, biological, and radiological threats. Going back to, I believe it was our 7th presidential drawdown, we actually provided a number of personal protective equipment items, and we have also had a longstanding tradition of cooperating with the Ukrainians through the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, and we've provided significant quantities of personal protective equipment through that program.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and go out to the phones here. Phil Stewart, Reuters.
Yeah, thank you. Just to double down on the nuclear issue, could you just give us a bit greater sense of whether you've seen anything to indicate that Russia is contemplating a use of nuclear weapons? And secondly, is there any evidence that's been uncovered so far by the U.S. or its allies as to who is behind the ruptures of the Nord Stream pipelines? Thanks.
Phil, so in terms of the nuclear question, we have certainly heard the saber rattling from Putin, but we see no signs that would cause us to alter our posture in terms of the nuclear piece. And on the pipeline issue, I don't have any new information for you.
Okay, thanks very much. Laura?
First, I just wanted to, on the nuclear question, your answer to Jen, you said you'd see nothing to corroborate those reports about the convoy heading toward the border.
I only have seen the open source reports. I don't have anything else but the open source reports.
Okay, so you're not telling us that you have not been able to corroborate that. Can you just clarify?
I have only the open source reports. I have nothing else.
And just to,
I'm sorry, I see what you're saying. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then separately on the HIMARS, it's been quite a few weeks, I think, since we've seen HIMARS launchers being transferred to Ukraine. Can you just talk about that decision to send 4 more right now, and how do you balance Ukraine's need for additional HIMARS with our own needs for contingencies?
So with every drawdown package for each equipment item, and HIMARS is just one of them, we look at the readiness implications for U.S. forces, and we are comfortable that we are not incurring any serious readiness impacts in terms of the HIMARS or any other capability in this or any previous drawdown package. And that is something that we will continue to do with every single package. In terms of HIMARS specifically, what we're seeing on the battlefield is that they will be able to use these additional HIMARS, and it'll give them additional operational flexibility. I should mention that I think we always focus on the U.S. HIMARS, and I just want to remind everyone that we're not the only ones providing MLRS systems. Actually, the Ukrainians, in addition to what will now be 20 U.S. HIMARS, there's 10 from allies, and there's 2 more from allies that are on the way.
Okay. Let me go to the back here, and I'll come right back to you. Gordon?
Thanks. As you know, the Ukrainians would like the next level weapon, namely the TACMs. They provide a distance far into other places, particularly Crimea. Can you kind of help us understand what the administration's position is on ATACMS, given what's been said about supporting Ukraine's efforts to restore its territorial integrity, and if there were assurances provided to the U.S. by the Ukrainians on targeting, would that suffice to make that provision?
So in terms of this capability, but again, with other capabilities as well, we're looking at what the battlefield needs are. And it's our assessment that with the existing GMLRS capability that they have on the HIMARS and that we're providing more of with this package, that they can reach the vast majority of targets on the battlefield.
Into Crimea, though, they can't with any of the weapons that have been provided thus far.
We think they can reach the vast majority of targets, including Crimea. And just to be clear, Crimea is Ukraine.
Okay, we'll go out to the phone and then I'll come back into the room here. JJ Green, WTOP.
Thank you very much, General, for the opportunity to ask this question. DASD Cooper, what kind of conversations are you having with allies about the concerns that have come up regarding the possibility of Russia's nuclear activity? They've been threatening to do this, and I'm sure you've been talking with allies about this because allies are talking about it independently, but what kinds of conversations have you had with them, and can you share anything about where they go?
Thanks. If I heard correctly, it's a question about consultations with allies on the nuclear threat. And, what I would say to that is, we have continually consulted with allies about the Russia threat, and the nuclear threat that Russia poses is just one aspect of that. And certainly the NATO forum is our premier forum for consultation on these issues. So this has been, a longstanding topic of consultation for us.
Thank you. Let's go to Oren.
Two questions. One on MRAPs. You provided 40 back in August, where there was quite a bit of speculation that it was for a counteroffensive, and now you've just quintupled that. Why? What is it about the MRAP that the Ukraine has found valuable on the battlefield? And then another question. President Biden signed Lend-Lease back in May. It's a new fiscal year. Are there plans to use Lend-Lease in any way to transfer weaponry, or are you sticking with drawdown in USAI at this point?
Okay, so I'll take the Lend-Lease one first. So we appreciate Congress's support for Ukraine with the Lend-Lease legislation. However, right now we're really focused on presidential drawdown and using that as our primary authority for being able to provide equipment directly from U.S. military stocks, because unlike Lend-Lease, it doesn't have any provisions that would require, reimbursement for, say, damaged equipment and that sort of thing. So we're sticking with PDA for now. In terms of the MRAPs, this is just a capability that we think will be useful on the battlefield. We see it as useful for maneuver in the areas that that Ukraine is seeking to retake, and so the time was right for us to increase the total amount.
Okay. We can do a few more. We'll go to Annie.
On nuclear weapons. Do you think that if President Putin uses nuclear weapons to Ukraine, then North Korean Kim Jong-un obsession with using nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula will become stronger?
I don't know if you
I don't think we want to get into hypotheticals. Clearly, we've communicated that there would be consequences for any use of nuclear weapons, but we won't get into hypothetical situations. Thank you. Let me go to Tony.
One nuclear question and one conventional question. What signs is the U.S. looking for to indicate that Russia may launch weapons? You said we see no signs that would cause us to alter our posture now. What signs are you looking for?
Tony, I'm not going to get into the specifics of our intelligence and warning posture.
This is the second round of those artillery-launched anti-tank mines. It's kind of interesting.
Yes.
How are they being used? Are they being used to blow up Russian tanks like the Javelin, or to block Russian tank movements, clearing, to block off corridors or something? How are they being used?
So you'd have to check with the Ukrainians to get kind of a full sense, but my sense is that they are incredibly useful for being able to block Russian maneuver forces as the Ukrainians are trying to press forward.
Okay, let me just do one out on the phone here. Joe Gould, Defense News.
Hi, thank you. My question is about the precision guided munitions. DOD budget documents have acknowledged that the U.S. is sending Excalibur rounds to Ukraine. Are those the munitions in this package? And then separately on HIMARS, is the number here for about Ukraine's ability to absorb them, or primarily about controlling readiness implications?
So on the first one on Excalibur, yes. When I refer to 500 precision-guided 155 millimeter artillery rounds, that was a reference to the Excalibur round. And in terms of the HIMARS, but again, the other capabilities as well, we're looking at what is needed on the battlefield. For drawdown, we tend to look in terms of more immediate timeframes because we know that we can get it there within days or weeks or at most months. So we're looking at what those needs are in that time frame. When we do our Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative packages, like we did last week, where we're actually procuring, then we're looking out at a much longer time horizon and envisioning what the Ukrainians will need on future battlefields to defend themselves.
Thank you. Cognizant of your time, ma'am, so we'll just do one or two more here and then let you go. Body?
Thank you, General. Thanks, ma'am, for doing this. I have two questions. We're speaking about immediate needs and winter fighting. It is clear that Ukrainians have been demanding tanks at the highest level, and they think it's an immediate need. So why hasn't the U.S. and allies met that need so far? And then on the other question is looking to long terms, providing the Ukrainian weapons with the capabilities, Ukrainian military with the capability they need. Can you address the merits of maybe having centralized mechanism for training, and is this something to be that is being considered right now or not, and why? Thank you.
Great, excellent. So on tanks, we absolutely agree that the Ukrainians need tanks. And, I don't have the breakout of numbers, but, the U.S. has worked with allies to support Ukraine with 1,000 armored tanks and other, armored APCs so far. So we definitely see the need for tanks. The easiest to provide immediately and be immediately deployed on the battlefield are the Soviet-type tanks that the Ukrainians already know how to operate, but more importantly, that they know how to repair and that they have spare parts for. So one of the challenges with introducing other, Western-type tanks is the maintenance and the sustainment piece. And with every single capability we give to Ukraine, or with every capability we encourage our allies and partners to provide, we want to make sure that they have the right maintenance and the right sustainment, and that they're supporting the Ukrainians with being able to do that. Now, on your question about training, so far, we have focused. Now, first of all, it's important to note we've been training the Ukrainians since just after 2014, and we're very proud of the training that we have done of the Ukrainian armed forces over the years. But since the invasion, our focus has really been on training them for new equipment, so that those new equipment items that we provide, they can immediately put to good use on the battlefield. Whether you're talking, the M777 or the HIMARS or new UASs that we're providing. So that has been our focus, and we have been coordinating that training, and we've been coordinating it with allies via the team, the U.S. and UK-led team in Germany, to make sure that the allies can work together in different locations and also to reinforce each other's training programs. But certainly, we really welcome additional training that is being provided right now by the Brits. The UK has started a major training program to train at the basic training level, and we'll continue to see how we can evolve our own training program and coordinate with the allies using that central coordination hub in Germany.
Thank you. Jennifer and then Qasim, and then we're going to...
Can you rule out that the U.S. was involved in any way on the attacks on the pipeline, the Nord Stream pipeline?
The U.S. was in no way involved.
Qasim, last question.
Madam, question about nuclear. I know that you won't talk about what you see on the ground, and I know that the United States hasn't changed its posture, but to what extent are you concerned that Russians might use tactical nuclear weapons in the battlefield in Ukraine? And also another question as a general question. what is the biggest lesson that you learned about Russians in this war in Ukraine?
Okay. Oh, that one's really hard. So on the nuclear piece, certainly we always have to take the threat of nuclear use seriously, and so we do. And that's why we are watching very closely, and that's why we do consult closely with allies. But at the same time, at this point, its rhetoric is only rhetoric, and it's irresponsible saber rattling that we see at this point. The greatest lesson about Russia, it's hard to come up with just one lesson, but I think that most of us watching this have been appalled and horrified at the state of the Russian armed forces, from the ground all the way up to the top, in terms of the poor quality leadership, the brutality of the tactics, and with every day we continue to see this horror unfolding.
Thank you very much for your time today, ma'am. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right. So in addition to today's PDA announcement, I do have a few other updates to provide. As you are aware, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea conducted a ballistic missile launch last night that overflew Japan. The United States condemns these actions and calls on the DPRK to refrain from further unlawful and destabilizing acts. In response to the DPRK's ballistic missile launch over Japan, U.S. Marine Corps fighters joined Japan Air Self-Defense Force fighters in a bilateral exercise over the Sea of Japan on October 4th, Japan time. In addition, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command and Republic of Korea personnel conducted a bilateral exercise over the West Sea on October 4th, Korean time. These engagements were taken to showcase combined deterrent and dynamic strike capabilities while demonstrating the interoperability our nations share. In addition, earlier today, Secretary Austin spoke with his counterparts in Japan and the Republic of Korea to discuss the threats posed by the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and their nuclear and missile programs, and to reaffirm our mutual resolve to maintain regional stability. The leaders agreed that yesterday's missile launch was a clear violation of United Nations Security Council resolutions and threatened regional peace and security. Secretary Austin also reaffirmed that the U.S. commitment to the defense of Japan and the Republic of Korea is ironclad. We've issued readouts on both of these calls, which you should have already received. The U.S. remains committed to peace and prosperity throughout the region, in order to secure a free and open Indo-Pacific. Our commitment to the defense of the Republic of Korea and Japan remains ironclad, and again, we call on the DPRK to refrain from further unlawful and destabilizing acts. I do want to get to your questions, but first I'd also like to provide a brief update on the Defense Department's Hurricane Ian recovery efforts across Florida in support of FEMA. As of this morning, the National Guard had more than 5,198 soldiers and airmen on state active duty from Florida, Tennessee, Louisiana, Mississippi, New York, Washington, Georgia, and Montana. Under the command and control of the dual status commander, Army Guard Brigadier General Sean Boyette, Guard soldiers and airmen are providing route clearing, sustainment support, logistics, security, satellite communications, search and rescue, 32 commodities distribution sites, shelter support to FEMA and other local first responders. The National Guard has 24 helicopters involved in recovery operations and have rescued more than 2,100 people and 50 pets thus far. The Florida Guard also has more than 1,300 ground assets actively engaged, including high-wheeled transports, fuel trucks and wreckers, and 50 rescue boats. More than 180 Guard troops have been airlifted to Captiva, Sanibel, and Pine Islands for security assistance in food, water, and commodities distribution. National Guard support to hurricane recovery efforts in Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina have concluded, but 65 Virginia Army Guard soldiers and 3 helicopters remain activated in state active duty status for potential high water missions in Southeast Virginia. And separately, as I speak here today, Secretary Austin is hosting Pakistan Chief of Army Staff General Qamar Javed Bajwa for a scheduled meeting here in the Pentagon today. This year marks the 75th anniversary of relations between the United States and Pakistan. We will be issuing a readout later today. And finally, on behalf of the DOD Public Affairs team and Secretary Austin, I want to welcome Assistant to the Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs, Chris Mayer, who arrived on station this week. As the department's senior public affairs leader, he will oversee DOD's media relations and public outreach efforts and serve as Secretary Austin's senior advisor on public affairs and strategic communication. He brings deep communications experience, and we all look forward to his leadership. And with that, I will take your questions. We already went to AP, so I'm going to go to Janie first.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You mentioned about the North Korea launched the missiles. I have two questions. Regarding North Korea's continued provocations, is there any immediate military response to North Korea?
Is there any military response to North Korea? Well, as I highlighted in my comments, the United States conducted bilateral exercises with both Japan and the Republic of Korea to, again, demonstrate our solid alliance and our firm commitment to working with one another and to enable interoperability. Thank you.
I have another one. The South Korean government said North Korea had launched medium-range missiles, but today, White House National Security and Council saying that it was the long-range missiles. What is the real? I mean, why are the two countries making different announcements about these missile lines?
Yeah, sure. So what I would say right now is that we're still assessing the launch, assessing the missile, and so when and if we're able to provide additional details on that, we'll certainly make sure they get that.
The, clear analysis on this? I mean, DOD's.
Again, we're assessing the missile launch, so that's okay.
This is very important because medium range and long
No, I understand.
range missiles.
Right, I understand.
So
I mean, the missile
different,
overflew Japan, but in terms of the type of missile, the point of impact, the range, all of that's being assessed right now. So I'm not going to have. I'm not going to characterize it. Again, we're going to assess it. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. I'm going to go back here. Yes, sir.
Travis with military.com. Thank you, Pat. I wanted to ask about the hurricane response. I know that this is partly up to the state, but do you have any sense of how long this military assistance is going to be needed, due to the devastation there? And secondly on that, do you have any sense of how this response compares to responses to other past large storms? I mean, just numbers-wise, is this a particularly large military response, or does it kind of is it similar to other large storms we've seen?
Well, I think, to your last question there, I think every single situation in and of itself, will merit the size and scope of the military response. Certainly in this particular case, given the swath and the destruction that the storm has caused, it's a significant amount of military support to FEMA and to the states. As far as how long this will last, I'd be speculating. Clearly, we'll continue to work, the National Guard, the Department of Defense will continue to work with FEMA, continue to work with the states, and support them for however long it will take. Thanks. Let me go ahead and share the wealth a little bit, and I'll come back to you. Okay. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Matt Seiler with ABC.
Hey, Matt.
Thank you. Had another North Korea question. What's the Pentagon's latest assessment of the likelihood of North Korea launching a nuclear test? And whatever that assessment is, has it now become more likely from your point of view, given this most recent launch over Japan?
So I don't want to speculate on whether they will or not. As you know, there has been indications in the past that the DPRK is preparing a test site for what would be its 7th nuclear test. If they do such a test, from our perspective, it would clearly constitute a grave escalatory action and seriously threaten regional and international security and stability. Regardless, we continue to work with our Republic of Korea and Japanese partners for all contingencies, and again, would call on the DPRK to cease these type of destabilizing and unlawful actions. Thank you. Ma'am.
Hi, Brandy Vincent from Defense Group. One follow-up and then one general question. On those bilateral exercises being conducted right now, when you say demonstrating interoperability between partners, from a technology perspective, what do you mean?
So interoperability, the ability to fly and fight together is not something that you can just wake up in the morning and do, right? As evidenced by our operations during the counter-ISIS campaign, as evidenced by the current effort in Ukraine, our ability to work and fight and deter alongside our partners is critical in terms of deterrence, demonstrating that we do have the capability to fight together when and if we need to. And so these exercises are an opportunity for our military members to work together to exercise those capabilities, to one, send a message that we are prepared, and two, that if we need to fight, we can, and we can do it together. Thank you.
Just really quickly, the classified version of the NDS was sent to Congress in March, and we've been waiting for an unclassified version since then. Last week, the President's coordinator for defense policy said that we could expect an unclassified version coming out soon. What does the timing look like on that?
It would probably be a huge mistake for me to give you a time from this podium. All I can say is that when we have something to announce, we will announce it.
Keeping it, quiet. Why hasn't it been released?
Well, first there has to be the unclassified national security strategy released, and then after that, then we'll be in a position to release the national defense strategy, the unclassified version.
Not at the same time, national security strategy.
Again, I'm not going to sit here and do action officer work at the podium, but thank you very much. All right, let me go back over to Kevin.
Hi, General. Kevin Barron. I'm a friend of Gordon Leupold's.
We've met before.
I have a question on Mike Pompeo has come out with a series of new ads through his PAC on wokeism in the military, and part of a political conservative accusation that wokeism is affecting recruiting, among other things here. Is the Pentagon doing anything to dig into this? Do you have any data showing yes or no that wokeism, that all the programs that have been put in place in the last couple of years here on racism and extremism, et cetera, are negatively affecting or in any way affecting recruiting and retention levels?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Kevin. As I'm sure you're going to appreciate, I'm not going to comment on anybody's particular election campaign, so thanks for the question.
That's fine.
All right,
do you have any data, or are you studying this issue at all?
As it pertains to an individual's election campaign, no.
As it pertains to the recruiting difficulties the services have been reporting the last few months?
I think we've been very public in terms of the challenges that we face as a department in terms of recruiting, to include a lot of the reasons that we assess why that is, to include a propensity to serve, to include the recruiting age population. And so the department continues to work very, very hard. All the services do to find ways to demonstrate to the American public that this is an attractive and great way of life. I mean, the opportunities that you get while serving in the military are unparalleled, no matter what walk of life you come from or what your background is. So I am confident that each of our services will continue to research that and look at it and find ways that we can connect with the public, because at the end of the day, this all-volunteer force needs volunteers, and it's essential to defending our country and our way of life. And I'm going to go to the next question. Ro.
Thank you very much. Two questions on North Korea. During the Secretary's phone call with the Japanese and South Korean counterpart this morning, did they discuss deployment of more U.S. military assets to the South Korea and Japan to reinforce deterrence? And secondly, do you still believe that denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is a realistic end goal of the U.S. policy on North Korea?
So denuclearization continues to be the policy, as we've said in the past. In terms of the phone call this morning, I think the readout that we provided the contours of the discussion to include a discussion about the exercises that our two countries have conducted in the past and the exercise that we conducted today. Thank you. Qasim.
General, as the North Korean missile flew over Japan, apparently there was no engagement against the missile. Was there? Do you rule out that there was no engagement against the missile?
In terms of trying to intercept the missile? No.
And also, you mentioned that there was an exercise with Japan, and also you tried to characterize it as a way of a response to
it. Was in response, correct. It was in.
It was a show of force? What was that really?
It was a demonstration of our commitment to working with one another and interoperability. Again, sending a message to the DPRK that the alliance between the United States, Japan, and the Republic of Korea is very, very strong, and that we are prepared to work together to deter any type of threats. So those were conducted in response to that launch.
Can I follow up on this, General, this topic?
I'll come back to you. I want to give other folks. Yes, sir.
Mike Press, the Washington Examiner. U.S. Africa Command said they launched a strike this weekend targeting al-Shabaab militants. It's the 4th strike since about mid-August. Could you give us an update about the situation on the ground there and if the threat from al-Shabaab is increasing?
So I'll talk in general terms. Really, I would encourage you to talk with AFRICOM, who can give you more of a deep dive. Clearly, al-Shabaab is a concerning organization, as an offshoot of ISIS. And we continue to work closely with the Somali government to try to train, advise, assist as they confront that threat to try to prevent it from spreading further. Clearly, these strikes are meant to try to prevent that from happening. We've all seen in the past what can happen when it does, and so we'll continue to work closely with Somalia on that. But I would recommend you contact AFRICOM. Okay, so let me go here, and then the back, and then I'll come back to Sylvie.
Thank
yes,
you,
sir.
General. Thank you. Mohammed Mehdi with the Mayadeen Network. Regarding to the North Korea, General, are you willing to sit with the North Korea officials, and on what principles table for these talks if it's going to be held between the U.S. officials and North Korea?
In terms of diplomatic relations with North Korea, I think that's really a question for the State Department to address. Clearly, our focus as the Department of Defense is working with our partners and allies in the region to deter, and certainly I think it goes without saying that any constructive, positive communication is welcome. Firing missiles is not a good way to do that. So we would again ask them to stop with the destabilizing actions, and in the meantime, we will continue to be prepared to defend our allies. Let me go to the person behind you. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Erin with Kyoto.
Erin.
And how does the Pentagon assess North Korea's capabilities in terms of accuracy?
That's really a subjective question, right? So without knowing what particularly they were aiming at, and I really don't want to get into intelligence on that. So
This is the second time, though, it's gone over Japan, correct?
I'd have to double check, but I think that's right. But in terms of accuracy, if you're talking about precision guided capabilities and things like that, yeah, I don't have an assessment to provide for you. But thank you. Okay. Yes, ma'am. And then go to Sarah, and then I'll come back to you guys. Sorry.
Long-range ballistic missiles that are rumored that North Korea might be working on. Is there any update on that?
I don't have any updates. Thank you.
Any worry about that program that's escalated?
Again, the issue here is North Korea's behavior and the destabilizing impact that it has on the region. And so that, of course, is concerning to everyone. Yes, sir. We'll go here, and then I'm going to go to Sylvie.
Thank you, sir. I am curious on how seriously the U.S. government is taking the most recent missile launch. I mean, it flew 4,600 kilometers, which is long enough to strike Guam. More development could allow it to maybe hit Hawaii, Alaska, possibly the West Coast. Has there been a change in U.S. strategy due to this launch on how to react, how to handle these missile launches from the DPRK?
Well, I think we're taking it very seriously, as evidenced by the fact that, again, we conducted 2 bilateral exercises with the Republic of Korea and with Japan shortly after the launch. And also, you saw the series of communications between, not only senior leaders throughout the U.S. government, but Secretary Austin talking to his counterparts in Korea and in Japan. Thank you. Sylvie.
Yes, thank you. Can you confirm that the Secretary has decided to deploy the aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan in the Japan Sea in response to to the missile launch?
So as you know, the Reagan was in South Korea. It's departed. In terms of its future movements, I'm not going to talk about that, but when and if we have anything to announce on that, we'll certainly be sure to do that. Let me go to the phone real quick, Tom. Let me go to Hyun Kim from Yonhap. Hyun, are you there? Okay. Heather Mongilio from USNI.
I was actually wondering if you can talk a little bit about the Secretary's meeting when he went to Red Hill. I saw that the Department of Defense released a new supplement to the plan that's now looking at a reduced timeline of 30 days instead of 120 days for defueling, as if that is a possibility. And I was wondering if you had any comments on whether this is something that the department is pursuing seriously.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. So as you highlight, the Secretary did visit Joint Task Force Red Hill this last week when he was in Hawaii. He had the opportunity also to visit the bulk storage facility and meet with the Indo-PACOM commander and with the Joint Task Force Red Hill commander, Rear Admiral Wade. And as part of those discussions, the emphasis on defueling this facility as swiftly as possible was a key aspect of the discussions, as well as doing it as safely as possible. Rear Admiral Wade has taken command of JTF Red Hill. I know that he and his team are working very hard toward that end, and certainly they're going to work it, again, as fast as they can, but just as importantly, as safely as they can, given the environmental and community impacts. Thank you. Okay, back to you, and then to you, Tom, and then to Fadi, and then we're going to start to wrap it up.
Okay, I wanted to follow up on the wokeism question and kind of the cultural wars going on around the military, specifically transgender service. That was granted, and then it was reversed, and then that reversal was reversed again, and now we have open service. But advocates say that there should be a law that enshrines the ability for transgender people to serve in the military, because it could be potentially reversed again by another administration. Does the Pentagon believe that a law is needed to protect service by those troops?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. Again, I'm not going to talk about or speculate about potential legislation. That's the role of Congress and our elected leaders. Our job in the Department of Defense is to implement the policies that we have, and we continue to implement those policies.
What would you say to transgender troops who feel a certain amount of insecurity and the future may feel uncertain to them?
What would I say to transgender troops as a U.S. Air Force officer currently serving in the Department of Defense is that if you're wearing the uniform and you're next to me and we're going to fight together. And you're my teammate and I'm your teammate. Okay. Tom.
Thanks, Pat. When the Secretary announced the extremism program and there was the stand down earlier this year, then press spokesperson John Kirby said the new regulations permit DOD to investigate possibilities of extremism ranks when the information came forward through various media or other ways. As you know, we talked a couple weeks ago how at least 110 members of the military were identified in report by the ADL of having possible links to the Oath Keepers. And I'm wondering what step, that was 2 weeks ago, and that's come to light. What steps, if any, has DOD taken to begin to investigate these individuals who were cited in this report?
Yeah, I don't have any specifics in terms of individual cases, right? But what I would say writ large is, again, we have clear guidelines and policy on what is and is not acceptable behavior within the Department of Defense. And if you violate those policies or those guidelines, or there's a reason to investigate, we will, and we'll take appropriate action. Again, I don't have any information on individual cases that you're talking about.
110 names are out there, sir. That's why.
So I would recommend you contact the individual services, and they may be able to provide you with additional details, because depending on the agency, that would be the responsible agency for investigating. Thanks. Okay, Tony, and then I'm going to do one more from the phone.
Thanks. While Afghanistan is out of everybody's mind, there's still a classified after-action report. Can you check the status of that and when the Secretary is going to be able to release it, an unclassified summary?
Yeah, and just to, yes, I can do that.
And we're 6 months into the Ukraine invasion by Russia. Is there any attempt to name the U.S. and NATO operation to arm the Ukrainians?
At this time, I'm not aware that there's any request to formally name the operation.
Interesting. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Fadi, last one.
General again, yeah. So these two exercises in response to the missile launch by North Korea, can you explain to us the significance of using the JDAM with South Korea? What kind of message are you sending with using those? And how exercise with fighter jets is relevant to a missile launch? I mean, how do you defend that? And a separate topic, the Secretary spoke with his Saudi counterpart. Do you have anything on that? Thank you.
So we will issue a readout on the phone call, and thanks for mentioning that. I should have mentioned that in my topper. In terms of fighter aircraft, in terms of any type of exercises that we conduct, again, it demonstrates the full range of capabilities that we have. But I think if you look at the forest through the trees here, it's the fact that our militaries can work together across multiple different types of platforms, capabilities, environments, that we can fly together, we can fight together, and that are, not even in the air, not just in the air, on the sea and on the land, that we have capabilities that enable us to integrate and synchronize and to deter and defend. And so your question in terms of what's the significance of using JDAMs, as we have seen in multiple conflicts, the ability to conduct precision strike, to be able to strike a target that you want to strike when you want to strike it is a distinct advantage on the battlefield. And so our militaries, in this case the Republic of Korea and in the United States military, the ability for them to fly together and to conduct precision strike, again, sends a clear message. So actually, I'm sorry, I got one person I did not call, John Turpak, Air and Space Force Magazine.
Thank you, General. The President or the White House last night issued a change to the Defense Production Act relative to the drawdown, relative to production of weapons. Can you talk about what some of the practical aspects are to that and how it directly or perhaps is separate from the Ukraine weapons announcements that were made earlier in your briefing?
Yeah, thanks, John. Unfortunately, I can't. Because I just don't know. So let me take that question and we'll get back to you on that one. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. Appreciate it.